Hello and welcome to Uncommon Law, my podcast about true stories from my life experience of over 50 years as a lawyer and trial judge. This is a look at the law from the inside out, stuff they don't teach in law school. This is Judge Rudy Greco, retired Justice of the New York State Supreme Court. Gleason's Gym, the old Gleason's Gym, I used to be the lawyer for that place, was on 31st Street, West 31st Street, just east of 8th Avenue, in the basement, or not the basement, in the first floor, the street floor of a big industrial loft manufacturing building in the garment center. And the gym itself was a blue-collar workplace. It was a total democratic, small d atmosphere. We had boxes, generally 50 or so, working out at the same time, and they had two rings where there was sparring going on, and all the heavy bags, etc., speed bags, jump rope, mirrors, all kinds of things going on. And nobody paid attention to anybody else. Everybody was there doing their job. It was a real workplace, except for on occasion when a famous world champion would come to train from out of town or foreign country or something like that. And then people out of curiosity would stop and watch that person train or watch that person spar, as it were. But Roberto Vinas was an exception. Roberto Vinas was about 5 foot 5 inches tall, 130 pounds muscled. He looks like he was a dark-skinned Puerto Rican kid, and he looked like he was carved out of ebony. In his own neighborhood, he came from the south side of Williamsburg, very tough neighborhood in Brooklyn, and his nickname there was Negro because he was black. He was a handsome, handsome kid, really a charmer, and he was also a ladies' man, which became a problem. He had a great personality. He had a beautiful, shining white smile, wide smile, bright eyes, and a great sense of humor. And when you looked at him in the gym, with 50 other guys working out, he stood out. He stood out like Secretariat would stand out at the racetrack. He was a thoroughbred, this kid. You could see it from a mile away. And whenever he sparred, everybody would stop to watch, including heavyweight contender Jerry Cooney, who looked on in admiration, as well as boxing buff and often visitor to Gleason's Miles Davis, the famous trumpeter. Everybody would stop, and they were absolutely mesmerized by Vinas, and with good reason. He was trained by a little unassuming man called Rodolfo Panama Guerra, who was like a father figure. But Panama was a working man. He worked in a ribbon factory across the river in New Jersey, and he lived in a project in Spanish Harlem. He had been Venus's trainer right through the amateurs. He had an illustrious amateur career, which I'll talk about. But he was like a proud father of a talented son. And the son became spoiled. And after a while in their relationship, Roberto Vinas was giving Panama orders rather than the other way around. And Panama would let him go. He was very permissive because he just idolized the kid. And he was a terrific, terrific talent. And Panama had trained him right through his Golden Glove career and amateur career. He had an extensive amateur career. In the Golden Gloves, he won the 126-pound title 3 times in a row. And that's a big deal because in the Golden Gloves, a heavyweight, it's a single elimination tournament like the NCAA. And in a heavyweight division, 1 or 2 fights will get you into the finals. Whereas in the 126-pound or featherweight division, you needed 6 or 7 wins, just like the NCAA, March Madness. You had to really compete to get to the finals and win the title. He won it 3 times. And he did it with astounding victories. He fought the first time he won. He was 5-0 with 5 decisions, facing a young fighter, a tough kid from Harlem named Robert Pee Wee Rucker. And Pee Wee Rucker was 5-0 also with 5 knockouts. He was a heavy hitter. And Roberto beat him. And one old-timer who I spoke to later on, this was years after the fact, he told me he witnessed the fight. I said, what happened when he fought Robert Rucker? Because that in amateur boxing and in New York amateur world, that fight was sort of like legendary, in a minor way. He said, Vinas got in the ring, he said, and Robert Rucker, we thought Vinas was going to get killed. He said, Robert Rucker was dumbfounded. He couldn't hit Venus in the ass with a bag of rice, he said, if he had it. He just was so elusive and so good and so perfect. And they started calling him Sweet Roberto Vinas, just like because his talent was so smooth and so striking. Just like they used to call Ray Robinson Sugar Ray Robinson because he was sweet to watch. Well, Venus, even in the course of his amateur career, had 2 wins against Hector Macho Camacho, who was in his amateur career 96-4. He had 100 amateur fights. He lost only 4. 2 of those losses were to Roberto Vinas. And I asked him afterwards, again, years later, I said, "How did you beat Camacho?" He said, "Listen, I watched him." He said, and he had such good moves. He said he used to fake and he had great footwork and he had his opponents hypnotized. Those guys would be waiting for what is he going to do next. They would all hesitate and wait, and he controlled the fight. He said, well, I looked at him and I said to myself, if I fight this guy, I know I'm tougher, I'm bigger, I'm stronger, I hit harder. He says, and I can outbox him. He said, so I figured out what I'm going to do. He said, the minute the bell rang, I ran across the ring. He was just getting off his stool, and I covered him with punches, and I never stopped throwing punches through the whole fight. I made him worry about me instead of me worrying about him. So Venus instinctively, it was brilliant, but instinctively he understood that's what we say in boxing, styles make fights. And he adopted the style that was necessary to beat Hector Camacho in his style. Also, it was axiomatic in Gleason's gym that the strong shall take from the weak, but the smart shall take from the strong. And Venus was smart. Well, he turned pro, and his manager was no less than Harold Weston Jr., who had been a top-flight welterweight contender for the title. And Harold Weston had gone on after his career to become head of Madison Square Garden boxing. And he recognized, he knew, he was an astute judge of boxing talent, and he knew that Venus was a rising star. Well, rising star, yeah, and he promoted his career and he brought him along to be a main event fighter. But as he rose up in the ranks, his problems grew and his temptations grew, and he was human. Well, he started falling, the parties and the women were commonplace. His best buddy was another Golden Gloves champ, the heavyweight champ, Mitch Blood Green, who was infamous for a Harlem street fight with Mike Tyson, which was precipitated when Mitch Blood Green walked out of a club at 4 o'clock in the morning with Tyson and said, Mike Tyson is a homo. And that got Tyson crazy. And Mitch, according to bystanders, Mitch got the best of Tyson in that street fight. Anyway, one day in the locker room, Mitch was visiting. He and Venus were best friends. They were like Mutt and Jeff because he was 6'5", Venus was 5'5", but the two of them were brothers under the skin. They really were buddies. And I get Mitch Blood Green telling me, pointing to Venus, who was changing into his street clothes, this mofo crazier than me. Oh, that was reassuring because Mitch Blood Green was reputed as the craziest guy around. So Venus asked me to manage him after he fell out with Harold Weston because he had lost a couple of fights because he wasn't training. The party was catching up with him, and Harold got disgusted, and Venus got disgusted with Harold, and then they broke up their relationship. And I managed him for his last 4 fights. One of them, we reopened the famous old boxing club, the Ridgewood Grove. He won. He won another fight in Atlantic City, which was witnessed by, it was on national television. It was witnessed by Frank the Animal Fletcher, who was a top middleweight contender himself, who, after watching Venus fight in this particular fight, asked for Venus's autograph. I mean, Venus had such talent that other professionals, prominent professionals, world-class fighters would ask for his autograph. I mean, it was astounding. In that fight at Atlantic City, I worked Venus's corner, and he fought Tomas Metralla Diaz. Metralla means machine gun in Spanish, and Diaz was a Dominican who had inflicted a loss on Venus earlier. And he was nasty before the fight, and he was trying to provoke Venus, trash talking this and that. And Venus was getting disgusted, and he said, "Rudy, I don't know, I'm going to choke this guy." I said, "No. Listen, just channel. You know, you're angry. You know, you're PO'd and everything else. keep it all inside. And remember that when you get in the ring, when you're competing and you're fighting this guy and you take it out. Well, anyway, I even have photographs. Mitralia was pointing at Venus and gesturing before the fight started, like, I'm gonna really hurt you. I'm gonna do this, that, and the other thing. Next thing you know, 2 rounds, and Venus wins by knockout. And he made a believer of Mitralia after that fight. Anyway, after 3 wins, Harold Weston now offers Venus a TV main event in Madison Square Garden against Dennis Cruz. Dennis Cruz was a very heavy hitting, hard punching left-hander, which left-handers are difficult because right-hand people are used to fighting right-handers, and it's hard to fight a left-hander, whereas left-handers are used to fighting right-handers all the time because most people are right-handers, so they have a little bit of an edge. Not always, but generally. Venus had lost previously in the Spanish Golden Gloves, the Guantes de Oro, run by El Diario. It's like a mock-up of the Daily News Golden Gloves. And he had lost to him, and I said, you sure you want to fight this guy? He says, no, I can beat this guy. I said, well, he beat you. What are you so sure? He said, well, he beat me because I wasn't in shape. I was using the Spanish gloves along the way to get ready for the Golden Gloves. That was part of my preparation. He said, I really wasn't in very, very good shape. That's why he beat me. He said, so I can handle this guy, and don't worry about it. So he started training for the fight. And in the middle of training for the fight with Dennis Cruz, we accepted the fight. I took Venus at his word. He said, look, he's a heavy puncher, but so was Robert Rucker. I know how to handle punches. Don't worry about it. As long as I'm in shape, I'm good here. I was okay. While he was training, I arranged sparring for him with another up-and-coming 130-pound fighter, Mike Ayala, Mike Ayala was a Chicano from Texas. And he was a very, very good fighter. And the sparring, sparring is supposed to be mutually beneficial. And there's an unwritten rule. You box and you do what you have to do, but you don't try to hurt one another, And the problem was that Mike Ayala was jealous of Venus's reputation in the gym. Venus was basically known as the best fighter in the gym at any weight. And Ayala was and he was jealous, and he was gonna make an impression here. He didn't say anything to anybody, and he was managed by Victor Valley. Victor Valley was a Puerto Rican guy who was the manager, not the manager, the trainer of Jerry Cooney, and he was kind of a strict old timer, and he knew the rules. However, as soon as the sparring started, it became apparent that Ayala was not playing by the rules, and he was there to hurt Venus. And this is supposed to be sparring. Well, the first round went. Venus knows how to protect himself. He came back, and he spoke to Victor Machado, who was his assistant trainer, and he said, and his neighbor in the south side of Williamsburg, in Brooklyn. And he said, Victor, this guy trying to hurt me. And Victor says, listen, don't do anything unless he tries again. Maybe he was just, in the first round he was nervous and he was a little frightened and he was overdoing it. He said, but don't do anything. But if he keeps trying again, you look at me, and when I yell south side, then you take matters into your own hands and put this guy away. So, second round starts of sparring, and sure enough, Ayala stupidly comes out, and he's trying to knock Venus' head off. He glances at Victor. Victor yells, south side. Boom! Venus connects. He clobbers Mike Ayala with a right to the jaw that staggered him. Next thing you know, he keeps coming, and Victor says south side, and he connects with a crushing left hook to the body, which crumples up Ayala, and Ayala's leaning forward. Venus grabs him in a headlock and takes him right and throws him right through the rings 3 feet onto the ground. And Victor Valley is screaming, oh, what's going on? All of a sudden, he's innocent and he's offended, like he didn't know anything. He knew exactly what was going on and he didn't stop it. And I told Victor Valley, I said, listen, wise guy, shut up or you're next. And he backed off. They knew exactly what happened. But that was training, and that was, some of the stuff that goes on in Gleason's gym, from time to time. Anyway, the fight comes. It's the main event. Dennis Cruz. First round comes out, connects with a left hook to Venus, drops him to one knee. Venus takes an 8 count, and he gets up. But his knees are wobbling, and his legs are wobbling. And in the corner, I look at one of the guys working in the corner was another world champion that idolized Venus, Emil Griffith, who was a phenomenal world champion, and he liked Venus like a son. Anyway, I looked at him. We let the fight continue. The second round, Venus goes on. He's boxing, but his legs are still wobbling. Third round, his legs are still wobbling. In the fourth round, Dennis Cruz connects again, and Venus is on the ropes, and Cruz is moving in, and simultaneously, Emil Griffith and I look at each other, and we wave to the referee, stop the fight. You don't throw in the towel. That's all movie stuff. We just, got up out of the corner and started climbing the steps to the ring and said, stop the fight. And he stopped the fight. Well, Venus was a shot fighter. What does that mean? Well, everybody who's born has a God-given bank account of resilience to injury. And every blow that you take, or every accident that you have, or every injury that you suffer is a deduction on your God-given account. Venus obviously couldn't recuperate from the first knockdown in the first round when he was in good shape. And you knew why. I knew why. Because in training, before I got to be his manager, he was guilty of heavy sparring. He even worked in training camps with world champions, Alexis Arguello, Roberto Duran, Ray Boom Boom Mancini. Even used to box with Vito Antrofermo, who was a middleweight who outweighed him by 30 pounds. And he would get into these fierce boxing matches with these guys, and he had no restraints at all. Well, he squandered his resilience. Even Arguello told me, he said, he came to training camp, and I had to tell him, Roberto, slow down. What are you doing here? Why are you making this so tough? All we're doing here is training. He said, you don't have to go like this. And he says he just had no breaks and no restraints. So to talk about him again, Roberto was a funny kid. He was delightfully very personable, and he hated my guts for stopping that fight. And years later, he would still remind me, and complain that why Emil Griffith and I stopped the fight. But we once went to a hockey game at Madison Square Garden where all the ushers knew him and revered him, and we had seats right alongside the ice, gratis of the garden. And he turns around to me. He says, I'm angry here. I don't understand. How come there's no Puerto Ricans in hockey? I said, because the biggest ice in Puerto Rico comes in the form of cubes in a glass. That's why there's no ice there. So how do you think these guys are supposed to train? Oh, yeah, okay. Another day, we're going down the street, and he sees this beautiful brand new Chevy Camaro in a really brilliant color. And he looks at me and goes, can you imagine how fast that car could go with that color? And we started to laugh. He was a good kid. He also, I once picked him up outside his house, his residence, an apartment house on South 3rd Street and Bedford Avenue on the south side again in Williamsburg, which was a wild neighborhood in those days. And he said, look at this neighborhood. It was summertime, and the boom boxes were going, and the frantic activity all over the street, drug dealers, all kinds of nonsense going on. And Venus says, you see this neighborhood? Thank God for winter and cold weather. Otherwise, this whole place would bug out. He said, they would be crazy. Thank God for winter. And that's the kind of kid he was. He was very observant, and he was a good kid and a lot of fun. Well, he stopped boxing after that, and he was angry with me for stopping that fight. But I know we did the right thing. New York City, the Garment Center, is filled with lots of talented ex-fighters. And as I said, talent is overrated. There were guys that I knew, Vito Antrofermo, Billy Costello, who had both of them became world champions, middleweight and welterweight, respectively. And they had they had only a fraction of the talent that Venus had, if at all. And they became world champions by sheer dint of hard work and perseverance. Whereas Roberto Vinas, even to his 50s, was always coming back. And he died in his 50s. And by the way, his brain was scrambled eggs at that point in time, unfortunately. It was a sad, sad story. And sweet Roberto Vinas is just another one of those tales of wasted boxing talent. Thanks for listening. Come back next week for another episode of Uncommon Law, lessons they don't teach in law school. I'm Judge Rudy Greco. Court is adjourned.